Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that's captivated historians and storytellers for centuries, the Great Library of Alexandria. We're going to try to separate fact from fiction and explore what this legendary institution was really all about.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
It really is fascinating how this one library has become such a powerful symbol of knowledge and learning.
It really is. I mean, just saying the Great Library of Alexandria conjures up these images of towering shelves overflowing with the scrolls and wise scholars from all over the ancient world. But where did this idea of gathering all the world's knowledge in one place actually come from?
Well, it's interesting. The Great Library wasn't the first of its kind. Both Greece and the Near East had their own traditions of collecting and preserving written works.
So it sounds like the Great Library was building on something that was already in the air. But what sparked this grand ambition to create this ultimate library?
Most people think Ptolemy I, the ruler of Egypt after Alexander the Great, founded the library. But it seems like it was more of a family effort. While Ptolemy I might have started collecting scrolls, it was probably his son Ptolemy II who really made it into the incredible institution we know of today.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're already separating fact from fiction. What else has history gotten wrong about the library's origins?
This is where things get really exciting. There was this scholar named Demetrius of Phalerum. He was actually a student of Aristotle's successor. Anyway, he was exiled from Athens and ended up in Alexandria.
Really?
Yeah. And some experts believe he was the mastermind behind those early acquisitions for the library. He might have even gotten his hands on some of Aristotle and Theophrastus' original works.
Wow, that's incredible. Just imagine having access to those original writings. Speaking of access, where exactly was this incredible library located?
Okay, so picture this. The royal quarter of Alexandria, the Bruchion. It was a bustling center of activity and power. And the library itself was part of the Mausion, which was a research institution dedicated to the muses, the goddesses of art and inspiration.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't just a building full of scrolls. It was a whole complex dedicated to knowledge and the arts. I'm starting to see why it became such a legendary place. What was it actually like inside the library?
Well, it was much more than just shelves stacked with scrolls. Think grand columns, a covered walkway called the Peripatos, where all those philosophical discussions and debates would happen, even a communal dining hall where scholars could gather and exchange ideas. There were lecture halls, meeting rooms, gardens. It was practically a blueprint for the modern university campus we know today.
Wow, strolling through those gardens, listening in on those debates, that sounds pretty amazing. I bet they didn't have to worry about tuition fees back then either. But seriously, how did they actually manage to fill all those shelves with scrolls?
Well, the Ptolemies were nothing if not determined. They sent agents all over the Mediterranean with bags of cash, to places like Rhodes and Athens with instructions to buy any scroll they could find. It didn't matter the subject or the author. They wanted it all.
Wow, that's dedication. I can imagine what booksellers back then must have thought. Like, wait, you want everything? All my scrolls? Okay, let me get another cart. Did they have any specific interests, though? Or was it just a matter of collecting as much as possible?
Oh, they definitely had their favorites. They were obsessed with Homer's works, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They collected numerous copies, meticulously labeling where each one came from. It was like they were creating the ultimate Homer fan club archive. But what's even more fascinating is how they went about expanding the collection. You see, they had this policy where they would confiscate books from ships entering the port. They'd copy the scroll, return the copy to the owner, and keep the original for the library.
Confiscating books from ships, that's a bit aggressive, don't you think? But I suppose when you're on a mission to build the ultimate library, you got to be a little bold.
Bold is one way to put it. But it wasn't just about amassing scrolls. The Ptolemies also wanted to cultivate a vibrant community of scholars. That's where the idea of the Mausion as a research institution comes in. They knew that to truly make the library a beacon of knowledge, they needed to attract the brightest minds of their time.
Okay, so let's talk about those scholars. What was life like for a scholar at the Library of Alexandria?
Imagine this. You're a scholar invited to the Mausion. You get a salary, free room and board, and you don't even have to pay taxes. Your days are spent researching, writing, and discussing ideas with brilliant minds from all over the world.
Wow, now that's what I call a sweet deal. Sign me up. But seriously, with all those brilliant minds under one roof, what kind of groundbreaking work were they actually doing at the library?
Oh, where to even begin? One of the early stars was Xenodotus of Ephesus, the first recorded head librarian. This guy was way ahead of his time. He worked on standardizing Homer's texts. And here's a fun fact. He's credited with pioneering the use of alphabetical order.
Wait, alphabetical order, like the way we organize everything today. That came from the Library of Alexandria.
That's right. Can you imagine trying to find anything in a library before alphabetical order? Zenodotus brought order to the chaos.
He was a true organizing hero. Were there any other scholars who helped shape how we think about and organize information today?
Absolutely. There was Callimachus, a poet and scholar who created the Pinakes. Think of it as the grandfather of the library catalog. It listed authors and their works organized by genre. And thanks to Zenodotus, it was also alphabetized.
Wow, so these guys basically laid the foundation for how we access and organize information even today. It's incredible how much we owe to those early scholars. Any other big names we should know about from the library's golden age?
Of course. There was Apollonius of Rhodes, best known for writing the Argonautica. It's an epic poem about Jason and the Argonauts. It's full of fascinating references to history and mythology. He was also appointed head librarian by Ptolemy II, so you could say he was a librarian poet extraordinaire.
A librarian who writes epic poems. That's pretty cool. It seems like the library was a haven for all kinds of thinkers and creators. What about science? Was there any groundbreaking scientific work happening at the library?
Absolutely. This is one of the most exciting aspects of the library, in my opinion. One of the most famous scholars was Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the third head librarian. He was a true polymath, a poet, a geographer, a mathematician, you name it. But what he's really known for is calculating the circumference of the Earth. And he was incredibly accurate, only off by a couple of 100 kilometers. He also drew a map of the known world, using the vast knowledge available in the library.
Calculating the Earth's circumference back then, that's next-level genius. What other scientific pursuits were they exploring at the library?
Medicine was another major area of focus. They had scholars like Herophilus and Erostratus who were pioneers in human anatomy. Of course, back then, dissecting human bodies was a controversial subject, but these scholars were pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge.
It's amazing to think about all these incredible discoveries and advancements happening under one roof. It truly sounds like a golden age of knowledge and learning. But I'm guessing no golden age lasts forever, right?
You're right. Sadly, the library's influence eventually began to wane. There were political upheavals, waning interest from later Ptolemaic rulers, and even a devastating fire. But we'll explore all of that in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, listeners, that's it for part one of our exploration of the Great Library of Alexandria. We've covered a lot of ground, from the origins of this ambitious project to the incredible scholars who made it a center of learning and discovery. Make sure to join us for part two, where we'll delve into the story of the library's decline and the debate surrounding its ultimate destruction. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Great Library of Alexandria. When we left off, the library was at its peak, a place where knowledge thrived. Discoveries were made almost daily, but like all things in history, it couldn't last forever. That's true. As much as we'd like to imagine a world where the library continued to thrive, history took a different turn. There were a lot of factors that led to its decline.
I'm curious to unpack those factors. What were some of the key events or circumstances that started to chip away at the library's influence and status?
Well, one major turning point happened during the reign of Ptolemy VIII, Physcon. In 145 BC, he decided to purge intellectuals from Alexandria. It was a move driven by political motivations, and it had a devastating impact on the library.
So he basically forced all the scholars out. That seems like a pretty drastic measure. What prompted such a dramatic decision?
Ptolemy VIII had a reputation for being, well, a bit of a tyrant. Some scholars believe he felt threatened by their influence and potential dissent. Whatever his reasons, the result was a massive brain drain. Many top scholars fled Alexandria, leaving the library's intellectual output significantly diminished.
I imagine losing so many brilliant minds must have been a huge blow to the library. How did they cope with such a sudden loss of expertise?
It was a difficult transition. Without those leading scholars paving the way, the focus of research at the library started to shift. Instead of producing original works and groundbreaking discoveries, many scholars turned toward summarizing and reinterpreting existing commentaries. It was a sign that the intellectual energy that had once defined the library was starting to fade.
So it went from a place of cutting-edge research to a place where people were mostly rehashing old ideas. It makes you wonder if the scholars who fled went on to establish new centers of learning elsewhere.
That's an excellent question, and one that historians continue to explore. The diaspora of scholars from Alexandria definitely had a ripple effect on the intellectual landscape of the Mediterranean. But the library wasn't just facing an exodus of talent, there was another challenge brewing: funding, or rather, the lack thereof.
Ah, the eternal struggle for resources. Even the Great Library wasn't immune to budget cuts. How did funding issues impact the library's operations and its ability to attract top scholars?
The later Ptolemies weren't as invested in the library as their predecessors had been. The institution started to lose its luster, and the position of head librarians, once a prestigious role occupied by renowned scholars, became more of a political appointment. It seems that the spirit of intellectual pursuit was being overshadowed by political maneuvering.
It's almost tragic to see such a remarkable institution slowly fading from its former glory. And then, of course, there's the fire. Wasn't there a story about Julius Caesar accidentally burning down the library? I remember learning about that in school.
Yes, the fire of 48 BC. It's one of the most well-known, but also one of the most debated events in the library's history. The accounts we have from ancient historians are a bit conflicting. Some claim that as many as 40,000 scrolls were lost, while others suggest the damage was mostly confined to a warehouse near the docks.
So a lot of different versions and interpretations of the story. Is there any consensus among historians about the extent of the damage and whether the fire actually destroyed the library?
Most scholars agree that while the fire was definitely a significant event, it didn't completely destroy the library. We have evidence that it survived, at least in some form. Strabo, the geographer, he mentioned visiting the mausoleum just a few decades later. And there's a very productive scholar, Didymus Chalcynteris, who was working at Alexandria around the same time. He wrote thousands of books, which suggests he must have had access to at least some of the library's vast collection.
So the fire was a setback, but not the final blow. It's fascinating how history often gets simplified into these singular, catastrophic events when the reality is often much more complex. What about after the fire? Did the library ever fully recover?
Well, there's an interesting theory that Mark Antony, Cleopatra's Roman lover, gifted her 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamum to help replenish the Alexandrian collection after the fire. Talk about a grand romantic gesture. But even with this potential influx of new material, the library was entering a new era, one defined by the rise of Roman power in the Mediterranean.
So the library survived the fire, only to face a new set of challenges under Roman rule. I'm curious to learn more about how this shift in power affected the library's trajectory and ultimately its fate.
As the Roman Empire expanded, Alexandria's importance gradually diminished, and the library's fate was tied to the city's decline. The Roman emperors simply weren't as invested in scholarship and knowledge as the Ptolemies had been, and within Alexandria itself, other libraries emerged, perhaps even stocked with scrolls from the Great Library. It was as if the knowledge that had been concentrated in one place was starting to disperse, spreading out across the Mediterranean.
It's like the library was slowly losing its monopoly on knowledge. What a shift from its days as the ultimate center of learning. Did this gradual decline continue until the library just faded into obscurity?
Yes. It was more of a slow fade than a sudden collapse. By the mid-3rd century AD, references to both the library and the mausoleum disappear from historical records. And then in 272 AD, the Emperor Aurelian attacked Alexandria. His forces likely destroyed the Bruttian quarter where the library was located. Most historians believe this was the most likely date for its final destruction.
So it sounds like there was no single catastrophic event that marked the end of the library, but rather a series of setbacks and changing circumstances that ultimately led to its demise. But I can't help but think back to that story about the library being destroyed by the Arabs in the 7th century. Is there any truth to that account?
You're talking about the story of Caliph Umar ordering the destruction of the library in 642 AD. It's a dramatic tale, often repeated as the final chapter in the library's story. But most historians are skeptical of its authenticity.
Why is that? It seems like such a definitive ending to the library's story.
Well, for one thing, the accounts of this event appear much later in historical sources, written centuries after the alleged destruction. And there are some inconsistencies and details that don't quite add up. It's possible that the story was fabricated or embellished for political reasons.
So, another historical myth debunked. But even though the library itself is gone, its legacy lives on, doesn't it? I mean, we're still talking about it today, centuries later.
Absolutely. The idea of a universal library, a place that holds all the world's knowledge, has captured the imagination of people for centuries. And while the physical library of Alexandria may have vanished, its spirit lives on in the countless libraries and institutions dedicated to knowledge of learning that have emerged throughout history.
And of course, there's the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina, built as a tribute to the original library. It's a beautiful symbol of how knowledge can endure even through the most challenging of circumstances. It makes you wonder if that same spirit of scholarship and discovery that once thrived in the ancient library is finding new life within its modern-day counterpart.
That's a fascinating question, and one that I think is worth exploring further. But before we jump ahead too far, there's another fascinating chapter in Alexandria's intellectual history that we need to uncover.
Oh, another chapter. This deep dive just keeps getting more and more intriguing. I'm all ears. What else is there to uncover about Alexandria's intellectual legacy?
While the Great Library may have faded, the pursuit of knowledge in Alexandria didn't completely disappear. In fact, a new mountain emerged, although it was a very different kind of institution. And this is where we encounter the remarkable story of Hypatia, a brilliant female philosopher who taught in Alexandria in the 4th and 5th centuries AD.
Hypatia, I've heard of her. She was a trailblazer for women in academia. I'm eager to learn more about her and how she kept the flame of knowledge burning in Alexandria, even after the Great Library was gone.
That's a story for part 3 of our deep dive.
All right, listeners, stay tuned for the final part of our exploration of the Great Library of Alexandria, where we'll delve into the city's intellectual landscape after the library's decline and uncover the story of Hypatia. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our journey through the history of the Great Library of Alexandria. It's amazing how even after its decline, Alexandria continued to be a place where knowledge was sought and shared. I'm really curious to learn more about this new mountain that emerged, and of course, the story of Hypatia.
It's true. The spirit of inquiry didn't vanish with the Great Library. This new mountain was established, but it was a different kind of institution, more like a school than a research center. Membership wasn't about scholarship, but about who you knew. Political connections or even athletic achievements played a role. Quite a change from the days when the brightest minds flocked to Alexandria for the pursuit of knowledge.
So, a mountain in name only, it seems. I guess even institutions can change with the times, but it's a shame to think that politics and social standing overshadowed scholarship. Did anything of intellectual value actually happen in this new mountain?
Well, despite this shift in focus, intellectual life continued. And this is where Hypatia enters the scene. She was a remarkable figure.
Hypatia, the brilliant female philosopher. I've been looking forward to this part of her deep dive. I find it so inspiring that she was a leading intellectual in a time when women were often excluded from those circles. Tell me more about her.
Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a respected mathematician, and headed this new mountain. She followed in her father's footsteps, inheriting his love for knowledge and becoming a renowned teacher in her own right.
So she was basically born into the world of academia.
You could say that. She embraced Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that blended Plato's ideas with mystical concepts.
Neoplatonism, that sounds pretty complex.
It was a pretty radical philosophy for its time, and it attracted a diverse group of students eager to learn from her.
A woman teaching philosophy and attracting students from all over. It's hard to imagine how groundbreaking that must have been back then. What was it about her teaching that drew people in?
Hypatia had a reputation for being a brilliant and engaging teacher. Her lectures were said to be captivating. She clearly had a passion for knowledge and a gift for sharing it with others. And remember, this was a time when women were rarely given a platform to speak publicly, let alone teach philosophy.
Right, it's remarkable.
Hypatia challenged those norms and became a leading intellectual figure in Alexandria.
It's amazing to think that she was carrying the torch of knowledge even as the Great Library itself had faded into memory. Her story is so inspiring, but I also recall it having a tragic ending.
Unfortunately, you're right. Hypatia's life ended in a very brutal way. She got caught up in a political feud between Orestes, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, and Cyril, the Christian bishop.
Oh, I remember reading about that.
Rumors and accusations flew, painting her as an obstacle to their reconciliation. And in 415 AD, she was brutally murdered by a mob of Christian fanatics.
What a senseless and horrific act. It's a reminder that even in centers of learning, intolerance and violence can take hold. It makes you wonder what might have been if Hypatia had been allowed to continue her work. Did her death mark the end of philosophical inquiry in Alexandria?
It was a devastating loss for the city and for the world of philosophy. Her school collapsed, and Alexandria's philosophical traditions suffered a significant blow. However, despite this tragedy, Neoplatonism and paganism continued in Alexandria and throughout the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. Archaeological findings suggest that new lecture halls were built, indicating that philosophical teachings continued in some form even after Hypatia's death.
It's almost as if the seeds of knowledge planted by the Great Library and nurtured by scholars like Hypatia were too deeply rooted to be completely eradicated. It's a powerful image of resilience in the face of adversity.
Exactly. And even though the Great Library itself met a tragic end, its legacy extends far beyond its physical walls. It continues to inspire us today.
It really does.
It reminds us of the power of knowledge, the importance of preserving and sharing ideas, and the enduring human quest to understand the world around us.
Well said. What a journey this deep dive has been. We've explored the rise and fall of one of history's most legendary libraries, encountered brilliant minds who shaped the course of knowledge, and even delved into the complex and sometimes tragic story of how ideas are preserved and transmitted across generations. I'm left with a sense of awe at the enduring power of human curiosity and the importance of keeping that flame of knowledge burning bright. What about you?
I completely agree. The great library of Alexandria may be gone, but its story serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a timeless endeavor. And while institutions may rise and fall, the human thirst for understanding, for exploring new ideas, and for pushing the boundaries of what we know will continue to drive us forward.
And on that note, I want to encourage all our listeners to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep that spirit of inquiry alive. Who knows what amazing discoveries await us in the future? Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of the Great Library of Alexandria.